I don't like to hype things up, but this is one of the wildest stories you'll ever hear. And if there's ever been something that embodies the quote, "truth is stranger than fiction," this is it. I knew middle school was going to be an adventure for me from the moment the school bus didn't show up on my first day of 6th grade. But what I didn't know was that I would develop a hilariously bizarre alter ego and unleash it as a weapon against my bullies. When I was going into 8th grade, there were several choices of electives to take, but evidently, out of the hundreds of students in my grade, only 2 kids chose to take art class, and I was one of them. But I actually knew the other kid pretty well. I think his name was E. coli, I'm not even kidding. But since there were only 2 kids from my grade wanting to do art, they stuck us in the 7th grade class, which was full of kids I'd never met before. Now, I actually had the same art teacher 2 years before for half a semester when I was in 6th grade. For the purposes of this video, we'll refer to her as Miss Javosa. She was strangely fixated on the idea that it's impossible to make good art if you're having a conversation with your classmates at the same time. Now, realistically, I don't think anyone in my class was planning to be the next Picasso, but we were incentivized to do our best work because the teacher hung her favorite pieces in the main hallway for the whole school to see. And make sure to keep that in mind because it comes back later in the story. I knew from experience that Miss Javosa was absent very often, but when she was there, she would leave the room for long periods of time to go check on clay in the kiln or talk to the other art teacher, and the point being, the moment her ears wandered away from the classroom, everyone started having conversations. Unlike most of my fellow 8th graders, my voice hadn't really started to change yet, and it was embarrassingly high and squeaky. This is actual footage of what I sounded like as a kid.
Whoa! 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 Whoa!
When I was in 7th grade, one of my classmates pulled me aside and earnestly said, "Look, Matthew, you've got to try talking deeper. It worked for me." But very little progress had been made over that summer, and I didn't like the idea of being in a class with 7th graders that possibly would have deeper voices than I would. But one thing I did have going for me was that I was getting my braces off after school midway through my first week, which would at least make me look older. So on my first few days of art class, I made sure to flash my braces at everyone so they would notice the difference when they eventually did get taken off. The art classroom had a few large tables, and I was sat in a group of 10 or 12 people, most notably composed of several girls who were clearly friends. And for whatever reason, these girls felt that they had the right to speak to one another even when the teacher was talking, which is a big no-no in Miss Javosa's class, and I vividly remember getting annoyed by their behavior from the start, and I gave them all a look of disapproval, you know? And from that point on, they all turned against me. Miss Javosa spent the first week going on and on about the rules and procedures of the classroom, so we didn't actually get started on our first art project until the 2nd week of school. And by then, I had gotten my braces off, and believe me, I made sure that everyone in the whole school saw my new smile. But I realized that with all the lecturing that went on from bell to bell the week before, nobody in my art class except for E. coli and Miss Javosa had ever even heard me speak before because this was a new group of kids. Then I had a real light bulb moment. What if I introduced myself to the class with a made-up voice, a fake accent, and a baloney story? Furthermore, would it be possible to act like a different person and play a character without anybody realizing that you're not being yourself? I had some acting experience in drama class. After all, I was cast as man number 1 in the school's production of A Christmas Carol. But obviously, I had a few reservations. First of all, this class was for a grade, and I didn't want my academic record to be tarnished just because I was pretending to be someone that I'm not. Second, the teacher still remembered me from when I had her the first time. And finally, E. coli could spoil the entire thing. At the time, I ran the idea by a friend of mine, and I actually just called him right before making this video to ask what his reaction was when I told him about this almost 10 years ago. And he said that despite it being one of the most insane social experiments that any 13-year-old has ever dreamed up, he wasn't particularly surprised given the goofy and insane shenanigans he had to put up with from me on a daily basis. So I settled for a week. Till the end of the week, I would still raise my hand when my name was mentioned during the roll call, but for an hour out of the day in art class, Matthew Abels would seem like a completely different person, unbeknownst to my classmates. And then the plan went into motion. It was our first day of actually starting art projects, and Miss Javosa explained the assignment and then got distracted and left as usual. E. coli was sitting on the other side of the classroom, so this was the perfect chance to make my first move, which was really important because whatever came out of my mouth would set the tone for the next 5 days. I hadn't really thought too deeply about what my new persona would be like, so I just went for it. And at first, the kids at my table didn't really know how to react because I just joined into their conversation at the most intentionally awkward moment, and the sound of my voice, well, it took everyone by surprise. The best way I can describe the way I sounded would be a mix between the voices of myself, Jar Jar Binks, and Miranda Sings, and this was long before I'd ever even heard of either one of those characters, so imagine my surprise upon discovering them in high school. Obviously, my voice has since gotten much deeper, so it's difficult for me to recreate exactly what I sounded like, but I'll do my best in just a minute. Every day when I first walked into the classroom, I'd pick someone different to say hello to with an unusually high level of enthusiasm, and then proceed to completely ignore anyone who tried to say hi to me. Shanone! How are you doing? Hey, what's up, Matthew? All of our art had to remain in the classroom while we were working on it, and we weren't allowed to take it home until the end of the school year. So at the end of every class period, we would put our work in a designated storage spot in the classroom and retrieve it the next day. I very often made it a point to show up to class early and accidentally grab someone else's project and bring it back to my seat. Then they would spend the first couple of minutes of the class period searching for their art, and in that time, I would either sneak it back over to their seat and make the poor kid think that it was there the whole time, or sometimes I'd even successfully frame the teacher by putting the art on her desk when she wasn't looking. The best part was that I made sure everyone at my table was always in on the prank, and I would wink and be like, shh, and they could hardly contain their laughter. Another thing I would do was go to the restroom during that class period and bring a whoopee cushion to make fake fart noises, and I would often wait until another boy from my art class walked into the restroom to blow the whoopee cushion, and then I'd time walking out of the stall based on the toilet flushes that I would hear so that he would have to see that it was me who made the obnoxious fart. But the most important thing to understand about my art class persona is that I was fully committed to it, and I never once broke character. However, I never said or did anything that made me look unintelligent. In fact, I think that some of the kids in the class thought that I was actually a genius. It was all about the way that I delivered my speech. And of course, almost every detail I divulged about my life outside of school was completely made up, and oh boy, I said a lot of stuff. However, on what was supposed to be the last day of my experiment, the art teacher walked back into the classroom when I was talking, and I didn't realize it, which meant that everyone in the class went silent except for me, and the kids from outside my table were immediately exposed to my voice and my character. But luckily, the teacher didn't say anything, and E. coli just seemed confused, but from that moment on, I decided, oh, what the heck, I'll just stick with this new persona for the rest of the school year. The first problem arose quickly when I realized that Meet the Teacher night was coming up, and my parents were going to have to meet my teachers, including my art teacher. And at that point, she hadn't said anything to me about my behavior, but I was terrified that she was planning to have that conversation with my parents. On Meet the Teacher night, our first stop was science class, and the teacher told my parents that I seemed off. But little did she know that I was quite literally about to soil my pants in fear. Then it was time. We turned the corner to the art classroom, and I don't know if it was a gift from the heavens or what, but the art teacher's door was locked and she didn't show up to the Meet the Teacher nights. So now I was safe and ready to have some real fun. Despite the weird voice and silly things I said, most of my table not only accepted me for who I presented myself as, but they thought I was really funny and became friends with me. Of course, that is except for the group of girls who went from whispering things such as, "Does he really talk like that? Why is he so weird?" to going out of their way to make themselves look better and more popular than I was out of pure jealousy and disapproval. And I'll be the first to admit, I wasn't completely innocent here. Let's face it, I spoke with a really bizarre made-up accent that doesn't exist anywhere in the world, but had to do so quiet enough the teacher didn't hear and E. coli wouldn't suspect anything. I was already wearing Crocs to school as my normal self, and being the only 8th grader at the table, I was the outsider. When I'd go to sharpen my pencil across the room, the group of girls from my table would laugh about me behind my back, purposefully loud enough that the entire class would notice. I've always loved making people laugh and will often go far out of my way to do so, but this was a different kind of laugh. They were laughs of envy and disapproval. I was different than them, and they felt like they were better than me. It's almost like that scene in Beauty and the Beast when the prince laughed at the enchantress's appearance because he didn't see who she was on the inside. The difference being, of course, that I didn't transform any of the mean girls in my art class into hideous beasts. This was a second-year art course with some challenging projects, including painting a portrait of one of our inspirations. Some kids chose family members as their subjects, others went with historical figures, and I chose to paint Oprah Winfrey. We had a day in the computer lab to print a picture to reference as we drew our outline, and I was pretty computer savvy, so I had mine printed out in like 5 minutes, which meant that I spent the rest of the class period scooting around the room spreading rumors about the world ending on December 21st, 2012. Humans are really hard to draw, so I actually tried to focus and draw a good outline of Oprah, but it turned out terrible. I kept erasing it and starting over for days to the point where I was left with a single large oval on the piece of paper. I remember one of the mean girls from my art class being like, "What's that supposed to be, Matthew?" And even Miss Javosa came over to check my progress and saw that I had an oval on my piece of paper while the other kids were starting to paint their portraits. And she was like, "Matt, you're gonna drive me so mad they'll throw me into the loony house." And she basically accused me of talking too much, which is bad because it's impossible to make good art if you're having a conversation with your classmates at the same time, blah, blah, blah. And also, I should mention that even the art teacher, who had heard me speak several times before, I think was so used to overhearing my new character shenanigans that she forgot what I used to be like in 6th grade. I remember one of the mean girls from my art class was on to me towards the end of the school year and accused me of being the best actor in the world. Then she asked Miss Javosa in front of the class if I used to be like this in 6th grade, and she said, "I don't know, honey, I didn't have him in 6th grade." So apparently, my performance was so good that even my art teacher was convinced and misremembered the real version of myself as a different person. That glorious day, I came home and went to trophykits.com, which was a website I was obsessed with at the time because I thought I was going to grow up to own a trophy shop. And I ordered myself a replica Oscar statue and gave myself the Academy Award for Best Actor. E. coli was actually in my algebra class the next period, and we would walk together to that class. And one day he asked me, "Why do you do it, Matthew?" And obviously he was referring to my character. And I simply said, "I don't know." Anyways, I didn't know what to do about Oprah and the oval, so I turned it into a drum instead. And I added an inspirational quote about instruments, and you can see it right here. I still have it all these years later. And obviously, it stood out from the other portraits because it wasn't a person. And the mean girls from my art class were incredibly brutal about it. It made me feel like Miss Javosa was going to give me a failing grade for it. But lo and behold, when I walked into school the next morning, my drum painting was the first portrait you saw entering the main school hallway, and none of the mean girls from my art class's portraits made it. I just realized that you can still see the tape on this drum portrait all these years later, so take that, mean girls from my art class. I don't have a picture of my drum in the hallway, but I was able to locate this footage of other people's portraits because I remembered that around that time, a local news station came in to do a story about a project that students in the other art class did. And for whatever reason, the other art teacher used different curriculum from Miss Javosa's class, and his kids released balloons with QR codes hoping that they'd eventually surface hundreds of miles away and someone would, scan the QR code. And I really don't know how he got away with calling that art, but all these years later, I was able to track down the news report, and some of the B-roll of the art classroom brought back memories. There was one mean girl from my art class who was particularly wicked, and for the purposes of this video, we'll call her Cruella de Vil, because she literally left a spot on my life over by this sink. One of our assignments was to make a papier-mâché sun inspired by the popular Mexican wall art Talavera suns. This was in December, and my family had actually just taken a cruise over the Thanksgiving holiday, which stopped in Mexico, and I saw real-life Talavera suns in person, which were very cool. On top of that, on my trip, I got to try, I believe it's called Maranitos, which was delicious Mexican gingerbread. So when I got back to school and was assigned this project, I thought it would be really interesting to make a gingerbread-inspired Talavera sun. And that meant I was going to be using a lot of brown paint on my sun. And nobody else in the class was painting their sun brown, so mine definitely stood out, but unfortunately not for the right reasons that I intended. The last few minutes of every class period were dedicated to cleaning up the classroom, and I had to spend a long time at the sink getting all of the brown paint out of the paintbrush I was using. Cruella de Vil got really impatient waiting for me at the sink one day and said out loud, "You know your sun looks like poop, right?" And this was the one time out of all the incidents when a mean girl from my art class actually offended me, because I thought my son was turning out beautifully. So I defended myself and I said, "No!" And I'll never forget this. She said, "Oh yeah?" Ripped the paintbrush from my hand, dipped it in the brown paint bottle, and chased me around the classroom with it. She eventually made contact and left a giant brown spot on my favorite shorts, and then she said, "Now everyone's gonna think you pooped your pants, so you should just go and flush your son down the toilet, where it belongs." And of course the girl got in trouble and was forced to write me a written apology, but deep down I knew I was doing something right, because she didn't say those awful things to me. She said them to my character that I was portraying, and she didn't know any different. And plus, I think the sun turned out pretty amazing. This is it right here, and I think it's really cool. Look at all this variation of brown. Like, it kind of looks like a gingerbread man. I have the swirls, and they're kind of candy canes as the rays of the sun, which is unique, so I like it a lot. As I mentioned earlier, Miss Javosa was absent a lot, which meant that there was usually a substitute teacher at least one day a week. She usually wouldn't tell the class that she was going to be gone, but I remember one time she did, and she said, "I'm going to be gone tomorrow. I've hired Mr. Chase to come in as your substitute because he won't sit there and play on his cell phone." And someone in the class asked, "Why is that, Miss Javosa?" And she explained that it was because he didn't have one. You see, Mr. Chase and his wife, Mrs. Chase, were substitute royalty in our school. They were an old couple that had very little in common, except for the fact that neither one of them would ever follow the lesson plan left by the teacher. Mr. Chase would walk into the room 5 minutes after the bell rang, throw his jacket on the floor, and tell the class riddles for an hour, and then quiz us on how many seconds ago the Civil War was. I actually ended up having Mr. Chase as a substitute all the way through high school even, and the number of seconds ago he said the Civil War was never changed. But he was extremely kind and adored by all the students. On the other hand, when his wife was in the classroom, she was strict, cold, and had no idea how to handle anything. I remember her once spending an entire class period turning on and off the lights in drama class as a way to try and manage behavior. At one point later in my middle school journey, Mrs. Chase didn't call my name on the attendance sheet, and when I asked her why, she said it's because she'd had me in so many classes before that she knew my name and saw that I was present. But only one time did Mrs. Chase substitute in my 8th grade art class, and it was particularly memorable. Our class was exceptionally fun and rowdy, and Mrs. Chase handled that with a long metal ruler. Miss Javosa kept several of them by her desk, and Mrs. Chase took one and repeatedly slammed it against the desk to get everyone's attention, and it was one of the loudest noises to ever come from a classroom, which was absolutely hilarious to our class. We all laughed, but this angered Mrs. Chase, and I kid you not, that my seat was just across the room from where Mrs. Chase was standing, and she threw the metal ruler in my direction, and it actually hit my ankle. And thinking back, if something like this were to happen in 2020 where everything's on video, I'm not sure what repercussions Mrs. Chase would have faced for throwing a metal ruler at a student. But this was 2011, and the whole class, myself included, laughed at the incident. I mean, I was wearing jeans and I had a pretty high pain tolerance at the time. Plus, the metal ruler was so long that it must have hit the legs of my chair or something before it reached my ankle, which softened the blow. So it was just a little bruise for me. But needless to say, Miss Javosa didn't ask Mrs. Chase back as a substitute for the rest of that school year after she heard about the incident. Mrs. Chase never apologized or even checked to see if I was alright for that matter. But despite what happened, I actually liked her as a person for the most part, and I would even say hello to her in the hallway when I'd see her, and she would smile, and I even looked forward to when she would substitute in the class just to witness the pure chaos that would ensue. But back in art class, we had 10 major projects throughout the school year. I remember we were advised to color very lightly with colored pencils on this project, but I of course did the complete opposite, and it upset the teacher, although I think it turned out pretty good. I mean, look at this shading, it's quite impressive in my opinion. But one project we did during the school year was called a word drawing, and essentially we were supposed to draw the outline of something and fill it in by writing a word or sentence that described it. Some good examples of this would be this shark, formed by the word shark, or even something a little bit more complex, like the Earth, filled with words about our planet. But I saw this as an opportunity for one of my first stunts of the school year. I decided to draw a school bus, but purposefully made every word so tiny that it would take an incredible amount of time to finish. I actually have this drawing all these years later, and you can see the sheer amount of writing involved to make this a reality took forever. But my project took so long that my art teacher actually excused me from the next project to finish this one because she saw how much work I was putting into it. However, you may have noticed that the stop sign is just colored in red and not filled with words. That's because one of the mean girls from my art class decided it would be funny just to finish my drawing for me when I went to the bathroom one day. And when I came back, I felt that all of my hard work was just ruined. I still don't know to this day which of the mean girls did it, but I have my suspicions. The mean girls from my art class loved to taunt me for any and every reason, whether it was for my art, my Crocs, shaming me for not playing any sports in school, making false claims that I had no friends, or often mocking me for not having a girlfriend. They always had something to say. For obvious reasons, I'm not going to say their names in this video, but there was this one girl I'll call Batty because she was bad, another I'll refer to as SMS because she always snuck her BlackBerry in to try and text her friends. One girl was straight up devious, so I'll call her the Wicked Witch from the 7th grade, and amongst others, there was even another girl I'll call JoJo Siwa because she wore a pink bow in her hair and wasn't really mean herself, but she laughed when the other mean girls did things to me and would ask specific questions about my character's life that were hard to answer and keep up the lies about. However, there was one shy girl at my table who always seemed to root for me, and I was super nice to her. At this time in my life, I was very into magic, and I had just learned a new card trick, so in the middle of class one day, I invited the shy girl to participate in one of my card tricks, and the mean girls watched intently with hopes that I would completely fail. I still remember the magic trick, so I'll perform it for everyone watching this right now. Oh, hello, I didn't see you there. I assume you're here for the magic trick, so let's get started. Every one of these cards is different. No two are the same. What I'm going to do is shuffle the cards so they're all going to be in somewhat of a random order when we do this trick. And I'm going to take the back 3 cards of the deck. I'm going to count 1, count 2, and count 3. Now, I don't know what these cards are. However, you can see that there are 3 cards, 1, 2, and 3. For the purposes of this trick, and since you can't choose a card in person, we're just going to go with card number 2. That is the most common choice. I'm going to close the deck, and I'm going to count 1, 2 cards. Now, I don't know what card it is that you chose. However, I'm going to put the card you chose in the center of the deck, obviously because I counted 1, 2, and you had the second card from the back of the deck. Now I'm going to say some magic words. Perhaps hocus pocus, alakadabra, or say alakazam. I don't know. But anyways, the point is, your card is on the very top of the deck. So I did that magic trick, the mean girls from my art class were left stunned, and I plan to perform more magic tricks throughout the rest of the year. I got my supplies actually from the prize area of my local arcade, and my friends and I would ride our bikes over there and play really hard to win tickets to exchange for whatever we wanted. And one time it was almost Valentine's Day, so I decided to exchange my arcade tickets for a pair of love cuffs. And I planned to wear one cuff around my wrist as a stunt in art class on Valentine's Day to see if anyone would jokingly link with me on the other cuff. But in the morning before school on Valentine's Day, my cuffs went missing, and it turned out that my mom threw them away a few days before because she didn't know what they were, and she just assumed they were trash, which is what? So I was disappointed to head to school without my love cuffs, obviously, but instead, I drew hearts on a piece of paper and taped them to my cheeks before heading into art class. Batty and SMS had secretly conspired to embarrass me in front of the class for not having a girlfriend, but I wasn't going to let them have that one. So I said that I actually did have a girlfriend. And to that revelation, JoJo Siwa said, "What's her name?" And I quickly had to think of a name that someone from our school didn't have so that they wouldn't know her. And I remembered that when I was on my Thanksgiving cruise over the break, it stopped in a country called Honduras, and the name of their currency was called the Lempira. So I decided that I would say her name was Lempira since no one went to our school with the name Lempira. But with my weird accent, it sounded like I said Lemipra, which was even better because it was just a made-up name. And then Cruella de Vil asked me to prove it, so I told her that I would bring in a printed picture of me and Lemipra the next day. The thing is, I didn't have any pictures of Lemipra because she didn't exist. But luckily, the next day I was gone on a drama class field trip to see the play Arsenic and Old Lace. But the next day when I got back, you better believe I was asked about Lemipra. So I was inspired by the play and told everyone that she died of arsenic poisoning. I even brought a Ziploc bag full of flour to school, and I threw pinches of it at the mean girls in my art class and told them it was arsenic. But one of the hardest parts about this whole experience was holding in my laughter, because I used to have a legitimate problem where if I started laughing, I couldn't stop. I would laugh for 20 minutes straight, and it was so infectious to the point where the entire class would be in tears laughing. And teachers learned to send me into the hallway if I started laughing, and this was often. So I couldn't do that in character though during art class, yet some of the funniest situations that I've ever been a part of happened in that classroom. Partway through the school year, the Wicked Witch from the 7th grade transferred into my drama class, and I was my usual outgoing self in that class. So this became somewhat of an issue, but I somehow successfully got away with the narrative that I was acting in drama class and I was my normal self in art. She believed it. But there was an assignment in drama class where the class had to learn the dance, the Mambo Italiano, and unfortunately the Wicked Witch from 7th grade was assigned as my dance partner. I purposefully danced with no rhythm, and I've never seen someone laugh so hard, which of course made me burst into laughter for the next half an hour or so. And unfortunately, this happened to be on the one day when my mom turned up at the school to volunteer sorting costumes for the school play, and she witnessed the whole laughter episode and reprimanded me for my behavior when I got home. Towards the end of my 8th grade year, I decided to build 3 things at home: a clock tower, a water tower, and a real-life roller coaster. And I would tell everyone in my art class about these projects, and they believed me because I convinced them that I lived in the first house that came up on Google when I searched fancy house, and they thought I was super rich and had the funds to do all this. But that wasn't the case. However, I did actually feel a responsibility to make these things, so I convinced a Home Depot employee to give me free wood samples to build the roof of my clock tower, but the employee clearly wasn't supposed to give them to me, so she mouthed like, "You can have them." But I didn't understand what she was saying, so she had to repeat herself no less than 6 times before she just told me to get out of there. Anyways, I actually did build this clock tower. There's like some remaining remnants today. It used to be like 6.5 feet tall, and I made this using, as you can see, Home Depot boxes, and I painted it, and there was Matthew gave us clock tower, and obviously there was a clock on this at one point because it was a clock tower. But I built this, and SMS asked me to prove it by making a peace sign in front of the clock tower, taking a picture of it, printing it out, and bringing it into art class. But of course, as my character, I knew I couldn't do exactly what she wanted. So I made the number 3 in front of the clock tower and brought that in, and everyone just rolled their eyes. The water tower was sort of a mural that I made using Photoshop, and I printed out like giant on my wall. I used the school printers to do it, and like secretly, because they were color printers. I convinced the librarian that I was printing this for a school project, which was technically true because I was talking about this at school. I mean, it wasn't really the truth. I built the roller coaster using wheels that I found from skateboards that people threw in their garbage cans, and I painstakingly screwed them onto a wooden basket by hand because I forgot that drills existed. I think that the class was at least impressed by my creativity. One day, when the art teacher realized that she was going to be out of the classroom for most of the period, she had one of my favorite teachers from when I was in 6th grade come in to watch the class. And the first thing that the 6th grade teacher did was come up to me and try and have a conversation because we bonded early on in my middle school years over our love of bacon. But the thing is, I couldn't break character or my cover would be blown, so I just ignored her and felt absolutely horrible about it. But to make matters worse, she said, "Do you not like me anymore, Matthew?" And I just pretended that I was sick and I lost my voice, but I think she knew that I was up to something. But then in my 8th grade English class, one of our assignments was to write a fictional short story, and I actually wrote it about the secret alter ego I was simultaneously maintaining in my art class. Of course, though, changing all of the details to make it seem like it was about a made-up kid that didn't exist in real life. I still remember the feedback that I got from my English teacher on the story, and she said, "Matthew, you have quite an imagination, but it's important to make even fictional stories somewhat believable because I don't think your story would ever happen in the real world, but I definitely did enjoy it." At this point, it was almost summer, and our school yearbooks came in. In the past, I had had all my friends, classmates, and teachers sign my yearbook, and it was lovely. But without thinking, I passed my yearbook around my art class, and the mean girls got a hold of it and wrote some nasty things in there, which is horrible. And when I got home, my mom asked to see my yearbook, and I had to figure out a way to cover up all the crap that the mean girls wrote in my yearbook because it was bad. So as you can see, I used a combination of whiteout and stickers to mask it, and it worked. But this was nearly a decade ago, and I have no memory of what it is they wrote in here. So at the end of the video, I'm going to try and peel up the stickers if I can and see what's underneath. Anyways, during the last week of school, grades were already submitted and we had no more art projects to do, so I remember playing hide and seek in the restricted access kiln room where students weren't allowed. I was flinging my son around the art classroom and even in the lunchroom. But every day at lunch, I would give my friend who I first told about the idea that I told you about earlier, I would give him an update on how my art class character experiment was going. And I always joked about how on the last day of school, I would reveal to everyone in my art class, especially the mean girls, that they had been fooled all year and they were talking to the fake Matthew Abels. So, on the very last day of art class, I just acted like I usually did in character. I said my goodbyes to everyone except the mean girls from my art class because I saved the best for last. Just as the final bell was about to ring, I went up to each one of them and said something along the lines of this. Bye, Shannon. Have a great summer. Bye, Cruella DeVille, and so on in my normal voice, and everyone gasped. But before anyone could ask any questions, I ran out of the room the second the bell rang and never saw any of them again. Well, at least in middle school. When I got home, I took this selfie listening to The Best Day Ever from SpongeBob in my headphones, and truth be told, I felt that my achievement in art class was just as big of an accomplishment as finishing middle school. I knew that the next time I would ever possibly encounter any of the mean girls from my art class again would be when they became freshmen in high school, as I'd be a sophomore at that time. And I certainly didn't want to acknowledge the fact that I wasn't really myself for the year that they knew me. So my excuse for having my normal voice in high school would be that I just hit puberty, which luckily did actually happen. But much to my surprise, I actually encountered some of them by chance out in public that next summer. It turns out that the Wicked Witch from the 7th grade lived in my neighborhood and I never saw her previously, and one day I saw her while walking my dog and we waved to each other. Batty saw me one day from inside Starbucks while I was riding my bicycle through the drive-thru, which by the way, I would not recommend. And about an hour later, she sent me a friend request on Facebook, and her accomplice, SMS, was actually in one of my college classes and she was required to comment on my discussion post, and I found that hilarious. The shy girl who participated in my magic trick turned out to be a hardcore Taylor Swift fan, which is interesting because I never even knew it in art class. I never did see Cruella DeVille or JoJo Siwa ever again. So hopefully now is the moment when Netflix calls and says, Matthew, we've heard your story and would love to make it into a major motion picture or television series. Then I'd say something along the lines of, thank you so much for the generous offer. I already have my cameo in mind, but this is my story, and what comes with that is a responsibility to tell it the right way. But luckily for you, I know the way. And just between us, there's many more stories where this one came from. I already have this thing cast. So anyways, let's take a look at my 8th grade yearbook, shall we? All right, so hopefully you can see these stickers here, which I am lucky to have had at the time. But now we are going to attempt to peel them up. And again, they've been on here a very long time, so I don't know. Okay, they seem to be coming up pretty easily. Oh man, this is from one of the prime suspects. Matthew, you were a little weird this year. What a surprise. Stop it. That was from Batty, so thank you so much, Batty, for that wonderful message in my yearbook. Dear Matthew, you are so psycho, but you're really fun. I just took off the next sticker as well, and I am working on scraping this off, and it looks like I wrote over this one and I pretended that someone named Nathan signed it. Hey Matthew, you're weird, from someone, another name that I actually don't even remember from the class. Uncovering the final sticker. I started to uncover it, but it became very clear very quickly that it's just an inappropriate picture that this person drew. But if you are curious as to what this inappropriate image would be of, here's your hint. Captain America, Chris Evans, leak. 9 years before. Also, why do I look like I'm in the Thank You Next music video right now going through that burn book? Alright, well that concludes my story. I know it was really long, so thank you so much for watching all the way through to the end of the video. If you did enjoy it, it would help me out if you did give it a like, subscribe to my channel, and even left a comment about your thoughts below. And if you're feeling super generous, you could give me a follow on Instagram at Matthew Abels, on TikTok at Matthew Abels, on Twitter at MatthewAbels98. All that information is on the screen right now for just 1 second because I'm gonna go. Bye!